Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh. This evening we continue our study of Pirkei Avot, of the ethics of the fathers. And tonight's study is the first chapter, second Mishna, Pirkei Avot, Mishna Bet. We are studying together this evening a section of the Mishnah which is especially close to my heart. Besides my connection to the crucial, vital message of our Mishnaic teaching, I am especially connected to this particular Mishnah, for this is the Mishnah of Shimon HaTzadik. For Hashem has blessed Henny and me with the privilege of living right here in Balot Dafna, right off the street called Shimon HaTzadik. We live on Shimon HaTzadik Street, and therefore the teachings of Shimon HaTzadik are read and internalized differently when one lives 4 blocks away from the gravesite of Shimon HaTzadik. Our street right here is called Shimon HaTzadik, for right down the road is the kever of Shimon HaTzadik. Several of our children, may God bless them, pray there frequently, and the special zechut, the special merit of learning the teachings of Shimon HaTzadik on Rechov Shimon HaTzadik is ever so moving. Having said that, let's begin the study of the Mishnah. Those people who have the text in front of them, again, the second Mishnah of chapter 1. Shimon HaTzadik haya mishiyarei Knesset HaGidolah. Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the pious one, the righteous one, one of the most outstanding high priests of the Second Temple, one of the Kohanim Gedolim of the Beit HaMikdash Hasheni, was of the latter members of the men of the Great Assemblage. We learned last week the reference to this outstanding tribunal of 120 members, including prophets and scholars, of which Shimon HaTzadik was among the last of its members. Haya mishiyarei Knesset HaGedolah. The title Tzaddik, although I'm sure many of the rabbis of the Mishnah, maybe all the rabbis of the Mishnah, all the Tanaim, all Tzaddikim, yes? The title Tzaddik is indeed a very uncommon title in Mishnaic literature, and therefore indicates some level of righteousness of this great individual. Hu haya omer. Shimon HaTzadik would constantly teach, would constantly say, he often taught. Hu haya omer. Now, my father of blessed memory, I learned Pirkei Avot under his tutelage many times, Baruch Hashem. And whenever he came across the phrase Hu haya omer, he would always say the same teaching. It wasn't his original idea, but he just inculcated it into our hearts so many times. I'd like to share it. He said, Hu haya omer can be read to mean Hu haya omer. He was what he said. You know, a lot of people they say, you know, like they preach, do as I say, not as I do, right? But Hu haya omer. In order to make it into this great work, you couldn't just speak. You had to live. You had to live the teachings. Hu haya omer. But Hu haya omer should be contrasted to Shimon HaTzadik Amar, or Amar Shimon HaTzadik. This was not a one-time teaching. It's not like one day Shimon HaTzadik got up and said, Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Omeid Al Torah. It wasn't that. This was his teaching. Did you ever study under the teachings of a great rabbi, for instance? And if you have, then maybe you've noticed that no matter what they're learning, like there's certain kinds of major themes that they have, And there are variations on that theme. You can be studying Masechet Shabbat with them. You can be studying Masechet Pesachim with them. You can be studying Masechet Zivachim with them. You can be studying, this book of the Bible. It's all based on certain basic teachings. At least that's been my experience, and I think that's true of the rabbis that we're learning about. Huaya Omer. The main teaching of Shimon HaTzadik was the teaching that we'll learn together this evening. Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omer. There are three foundations upon which the world stands. Each of these foundations, each of these pillars is crucial for the world's existence and continuity. Al Shlosha Devarim, says Shimon HaTzadik, the world stands. Al HaTorah. The first one is a reference to Torah. The world stands based on the teachings of Torah, the revealed divine word, the only book written by God, the number one international bestseller, published and translated more times than any other book in the entire world. The world stands al HaTorah. The Torah is such a basic element of the world that the Olam, the entirety of the universe, stands on the study of Torah. One way to study a society, suggested one of the great historians, I believe I heard this from my great teacher, Rabbi Professor David Berger, Shem should bless him. One way to study a society is to study how do they spend their time when they're not working. What is the pastime of that particular society? That's a historical approach, maybe an anthropological approach. What can you say about a certain society? And one way to analyze it is to study the pastime of that particular society. A great historian once noted that sociologically and historically speaking, the national pastime of the Jewish people, surprisingly, is the study of Torah. Our nation studied Torah in its spare time. We did have an interest and an involvement in culture. We were involved in art and in music and in sports, etc. But as a nation, ala Torah, that's what we did. We collectively understood that ein umatenu uma ela b'toratah, that the essence, the crux of our national identity is connected to our Torah observance, as well as our Torah study. In certain religions, only the clergy, only the leaders, only the spiritual guides study the words of God. Al HaTorah, in Judaism, every member of Klal Yisrael is connected to Torah. Not only to Torah observance, but to study of Torah. We all recite the blessing every morning, connecting us to the importance of studying Torah. The second teaching, the second foundation of the world, according to Shimon HaTzadik, Ve'al ha'avodah. The second pillar of the world is the pillar of divine service, the pillar of temple service, the sacrificial order, the avodah of tefillah, the avodah shebelev, ul'avdo b'chol levavchem. Please note that the worship of God is referred to as avodah. We refer to this in our prayers with that word as well. V'hashev et ha'avodah l'dvir beitecha. And one of the commentaries points out that some people may view the service of God, the worship of God, the sacrifices to God, the prayers to God, maybe as something which happens automatically. It's just so easy. Maybe it's really an avodah. Maybe it requires diligent work to be successful in that area. It's not merely a part of our lives. It's not merely a tangential connection that we have to serving God through prayer. It's such a basic element of world existence. For the world generally, and for the Jewish people particularly, tefillah al ha'avodah. Interesting to note that the word avodah, to most people, would mean work. Avodah. I have in front of me the commentary of Rabbi Kahati, Mishnayot, before I wrote one of the most excellent commentaries that was authored in our generation. And it's interesting that he quotes here a different interpretation for the word avodah. I hope it's not accurate what I'm saying, and I surely don't want to say this publicly. I'm speaking, so I'll say it with some level of reservation, and I hope I'm wrong. I read that there were certain people that criticized Rav Kahati's great work because of this particular commentary. He writes here that another way of reading avodah is not the service of God or the service of sacrifices. Maybe I should read it in his language. And I read about one particular community at one particular synagogue that was so enraged by what Rav Kahati wrote that they wanted to, how could he dare to say such a thing when everybody knows that avodah means, avodat Beit HaMikdash or avodat HaKorbanot. However, he quotes a source here. It's not his own idea anyway. He quotes in Sefer HaMa'or B'Shem Lev Avot, and V'yesh Mefarashim Avodah Mamash. Avodah Mamash. Al HaTorah V'al HaAvodah. The world stands upon work. Charisha, Ziri'ah, Kitzirah, working the field, the agricultural labors. Sha'arei, Al Yidei HaAvodah, Na'aseh HaAdam Shutaf, LaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Maaseh Bereshit, Asher Bara Elokim La'asot, Al Menat Sheyosif HaAdam La'asot V'La'asok B'Yishuvo Shel Olam V'Tikuno. Interesting, according to this interpretation, different than the way most people would read the Mishnah. The world stands on Torah, but the world also stands on Avodah. If God forbid everyone would decide tomorrow morning, chas v'shalom, not to go to work, the world would just, who knows what would happen, right? Imagine a society where no one is working. I'm not talking about a vacation day. I guess maybe Shabbat is such a day where no one does avodah, but maybe it's a different kind of avodah on that day. Sheishet Yamim Ta'avot. But let's say the Sheishet Yamim Ta'avot, if everyone would stop, God forbid, chas v'shalom, that would be the destruction of the world. And the third teaching, the third pillar of Shimon HaTzadik is Ve'al Gimilut Chasadim. The world stands upon acts of kindness, acts of benevolence. In what's called Rashi's commentary on Pirkei Avot, printed in the standard Shas, the Vilna Shas edition, at the end of the volume of Masechet Avodah Zarah. So Rashi writes there not just charity, not just tzedakah, because tzedakah, the Gemara teaches that Hesed, Gemilut Chasadim, is greater, is more all-encompassing than merely tzedakah. A tzedakah, charity, we don't want to belittle the greatness of charity, but he does not say that the world stands on charity. Although charity is a form of kindness, but it's more than just charity, because charity can only be done with poor people. You can't do charity, you can't do tzedakah. The Gemara says that there are three ways that Gemilut Chasadim is greater than tzedakah. Tzedakah is la'aniyim, Gemilut Chasadim is bein la'aniyim, bein la'ashirim, bein la'chayim, bein la'meitim, bein begufo, bein b'mamonah. So the world stands upon acts of kindness. The world stands upon sensitivity. The world stands upon sensitivity of actions. Every time we extend the kindness to someone else, it's a form of imitatio Dei. It's a form of imitating the divine, because God is the ultimate Gomel Hasadim. All of God's actions are Hesed. The more a person is involved showing levels of empathy for others, levels of concern for others, levels of levels of assistance to other people. That particular action is not just an individual's activity, but that's keeping the whole world going. Could you imagine if people only thought about themselves? God forbid, that would be the end of the world. Because there is nobody in this world, nobody without exception, there is nobody in this world who's self-sufficient. Every single person in the world, all 7.5 billion of them, needs other people in order to function. Each person could have their particular area, but we need to help each other. Al gimilut chasadim. When we read about these three pillars, the question is it A plus B plus C? That seems to be what he seemed to say. I mean, the Torah itself would not be sufficient. Avodah itself would be insufficient. Gimilut chasadim. And maybe each person should try to be involved in Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. But maybe a person can identify which of the three categories they want to major in. They want to major in all three. That's possible. But according to at least one school of thought, if we take the three fathers of our nation, who knows three? We know three. I know three. You know three, right? Shloshah mi yodeh. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that Avraham had a certain pathway, and Yitzchak had a certain pathway, and Yaakov had a certain pathway. Of course, it would be silly to think that the only one involved in Torah was Yaakov, Ishtam, Yoshev, Olim. Obviously, Yitzchak was a very deep thinker and deeply involved in understanding the teachings of God, whatever teachings of God were revealed or understood at that time. It says explicitly about our father Abraham that the Asher Shama Avraham Koli Vayishmor Mishmarti Mitzvotai Chukotai Vitorotai. Yet there's a certain emphasis of Torah in our tradition connected to Yaakov, and there's a certain emphasis in our tradition connecting Yitzchak to avodah, to self-sacrifice, to sacrifice before God, like Akedat Yitzchak. Doesn't mean, God forbid, that Yitzchak was not involved in kindness. Doesn't mean, Chas v'shalom, that Yitzchak was not involved in study. Of course not. But maybe each person has to find the area of excellence based on their inner self, on their inner character. And it's not Elokei Avraham, Kama Yitzchak, Kama Yaakov, although we do find that phrase in the Torah. We also find the phrase Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Ve'elokei Yaakov. Why couldn't it just say Elokei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, as it does say? And some say because maybe there was a different relationship. Avraham is not Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is not Yaakov. Obviously, Avraham was involved in prayer. It says explicitly in the Torah that Avraham prayed. Everyone knows that Avraham prayed. Avraham was the most original thinker probably in world history. Of course he was involved in Torah. Of course he was involved in analysis of the will of God. But we identify Avraham's main teaching mostly connected to Gemilut Chasadim. So how exactly to carry out these three pillars, as long as you're aware that all three pillars are necessary. If you're from the pillar of Torah, make sure you have some avodah and Gemilut Chasadim in your life as well. You can't say, okay, I'm into Torah, so I don't have to pray. I'm into Torah, so I don't have to do chesed. That's not a tenable position. And maybe if you're into avodah, you have to be careful to be involved with Torah and chesed. If you're in chesed, you have to be involved with Torah and with avodah. And maybe each of the three categories, and maybe each of the three people representing categories of these three people, representing each of these notions, always has to have a sense of appreciation of the other groups as well. Let's say you're part of the, Gemilut Chasadim society, right? You're running around doing chesed all day. Chesed for the living, chesed for those who are not living, chesed for the needy, you're doing chesed all day. Do you appreciate the greatness of Torah? Do you understand that we need the Torah also? We can't just live based on your chesed. Do you understand how important it is that people are praying and serving God? If you're from the avodah community, you're into the dedication of reciting psalms and praying to God and building the temple and offering sacrifices to God. And do you understand? We need Torah study as well. If you're learning, do you appreciate the people who are doing chesed? Do you appreciate the people who are praying? It's through these three pillars together that the world stands. We pray for the success of the entire world here on Shimon HaTzadik Street, studying the great teachings of Shimon HaTzadik. Thank you so much for listening.